There is a particular brand of silence that lives inside a police precinct at 5:30 in the morning. It is not peaceful. It is not the silence of an empty field or a sleeping neighborhood. It is the silence of things holding their breath, of filing cabinets stuffed too full, of coffee machines on their last legs, of fluorescent lights that hum at a pitch only the sleep-deprived can hear. I had learned to find comfort in that silence. It meant most people hadn't arrived yet. It meant the precinct belonged, briefly, to me. My name is Justin Silva, and I had been a police officer for 6 years. Before that, a cadet. Before that, the kid everyone in the secondary designation counseling office told would be better suited to administrative work. I was an Omega. That was the thing they danced around. The thing they said in careful, neutral tones with carefully neutral faces, as though the word itself might wound me. You have an Omega designation, Justin. Have you considered positions that would suit your, and here they always paused, your particular strengths? My particular strengths, as it turned out, included a near-perfect marksmanship score, the fastest mile time in my cadet cohort, an instinct for reading crime scenes that my first supervising officer called unsettling in the best possible way, and an absolute bone-deep inability to be told what I could and couldn't do. I became a police officer anyway. Nobody stopped me. They couldn't, legally, and the law had sharp enough teeth by then that most people didn't even try. I passed every test. I passed some of them twice, just to make a point. I worked my way from patrol to investigations in 4 years, which was faster than average, and I had the case closure rate to prove every promotion was earned. None of that changed what Captain Harwell was currently saying to me across his desk. It's mandatory leave, Silva. It isn't, actually. I kept my voice level. I had rehearsed this. The departmental policy on pre-suppression medical leave states that officers may elect to continue working in a modified capacity if they can demonstrate fitness for duty. I've had the department physician clear me. The paperwork is in your inbox. Harwell rubbed his face. He was a beta, which meant he wasn't navigating the low-frequency territorial instinct that I knew would be radiating off me if he looked closely enough. He was just a tired man in his 50s who had clearly hoped this conversation would go differently. Justin. He only used my first name when he was genuinely exasperated. Your suppressants ran out 3 days ago. Your prescription was delayed. You are currently unmedicated, and your next scheduled heat is 14 days away. Plenty of time for the new prescription to arrive and stabilize. I folded my hands on my knee, calm, composed. I have managed my own biology for 28 years, Captain. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing, he repeated, in the tone of a man who very much doubted that. I have a caseload. The words came out a little sharper than I intended. I softened them. The Meridian case. We're close. Roach and I have been working it for 3 weeks. If I take leave now, that momentum, Roach can carry it. Roach and I work better together. That was an understatement. He needs context that lives in my head. Files don't capture everything, Captain. You know that. He studied me for a long moment. The morning light was just beginning to creep through his office window, that thin, watery kind that promises nothing warmer. I held his gaze and waited. Modified duty, he said finally. Desk-based. You do not go into the field alone. You do not conduct any interviews or witness contact without a partner present. And the moment your physician flags anything, you are out. Are we clear? Perfectly clear. And Silva, his voice dropped slightly, tell Roach, he deserves to know what he's working next to. I said nothing to that, because telling Roach was the part I had been quietly dreading since the pharmacy called 3 days ago to inform me there had been a supply disruption and my suppressants would be delayed by at least 10 working days. Telling Roach meant having a conversation I had successfully avoided for 2 years. Simon Roach was already at his desk when I came out of the captain's office. This was not unusual. Simon was always early than me, which was an achievement I begrudgingly respected, given that I set my alarm for 4:45. He had a cup of coffee balanced on the edge of his monitor and a case file spread across his desk in a precise methodical arrangement that I had come to recognize as his thinking pattern, photographs along the top, witness statements to the left, physical evidence, reports to the right, and whatever thread he was currently pulling placed directly in front of him. He looked up when I approached. His eyes did what they always did. A quick sweep, top to bottom, a fraction of a second, the kind of assessment that was so automatic I doubted he was fully conscious of it. Simon was an alpha. That sweep was not possessive, not aggressive, just present, aware, the way alphas tended to be aware of omegas in their proximity, especially omegas who smelled like what I probably smelled like right now, with 3 days of unmedicated biology quietly doing its background work. How'd it go? He reached for his coffee without looking away from me. Modified duty. Desk-based until my prescription arrives. A pause, just a fraction of a second. Prescriptions delayed? Pharmacy supply issue. I sat down at my own desk and pulled my keyboard toward me. I told Harwell I'm fine, which I am. My next heat is 2 weeks out. I'll be medicated long before then. Another pause, longer this time. I was not looking at him. I was opening my email. But I was aware of him with a precision that the 3-day gap in my suppressant schedule had made uncomfortably sharp. I was aware that he had set his coffee down. I was aware that he had turned fully in his chair to face me. I was aware of his scent, the warm, grounded, faintly complex scent of an alpha at rest, not aroused, not aggressive, just present, in a way I hadn't been quite so vividly aware of since I had started suppressing in earnest 2 years ago, almost exactly when he became my partner. That timing had not been coincidental. I was not going to examine that thought right now. Justin. I looked up. Simon Roach was 32. He had the kind of face that photographs badly and reads excellently in person. Broad-featured, expressive, with dark eyes that had a steadiness to them that I had found, when I first met him, almost insufferably calm. We had not gotten along immediately. He was methodical. I was instinctive. He wanted to map every angle before moving. I wanted to move and map as I went. For the first month, we had irritated each other professionally in the way that two people who are very good at their jobs sometimes do when their methods don't align. Then we cracked the Voss case in 11 days because his methodical angles and my instinctive movement had complemented each other in a way neither of us had anticipated. And after that, we had developed into something I could only describe as a partnership in the truest sense. We read each other. We covered each other. We had been in 3 genuinely dangerous situations in 2 years, and in every single one, without any communication, we had moved to protect each other before ourselves. I was not in love with Simon Roach. I was very clear about that. I simply respected him enormously and found his presence more stabilizing than I would ever say out loud. 14 days out, I said, because I knew what his expression was asking. I've done the math. I've done it several times. I'm fine. I know you've done the math. His voice was even. Not challenging. Simon rarely raised his voice, which was its own kind of nerve-wracking, because it meant you never knew when he was genuinely upset and when he was simply processing. I'm not questioning your math. I'm asking you how you are. The question landed differently than I expected. Not how are you managing the situation. How are you? I'm fine, I said again, but it came out slightly less steady this time. He nodded slowly, as though he was cataloging that small unsteadiness and filing it somewhere. Okay. He turned back to his desk. The Meridian evidence log came in. I was waiting for you before I went through it. That was Simon. He could have gone through it without me. He had full access to everything I had access to. He waited because we went through evidence logs together, because that was how we worked, because 2 sets of eyes on the same information produced better results than 1 set of eyes followed by another. He waited because our partnership had protocols, small and unspoken, and he honored them without making them a thing. I let out a slow breath that I hoped was quiet enough he didn't catch it. Pull it up, I said. Let's see what they found. The Meridian case had started 6 weeks ago as a missing persons report that smelled wrong from the beginning, not literally, although there were aspects of active casework that tested even the most seasoned officers' olfactory resilience, but instinctively. The kind of wrong that settles at the base of the throat and doesn't announce itself as wrong for several days until enough pieces have accumulated to form a shape you recognize. A series of businesses in the commercial district had been reporting equipment theft, small items, precisely targeted, nothing that would individually constitute a major crime. Security camera footage had been degraded in each instance, not destroyed, just conveniently low resolution at the relevant timestamps. The businesses were not related. The equipment stolen was not related at first glance. It had taken Simon's systematic cross-referencing and my particular habit of staring at evidence photographs until something shifted to realize that every piece of stolen equipment, traced to its current application, pointed toward a single purpose. Someone was building something. What they were building was not good. We didn't have a name. We had a pattern, a ghost of a physical description, from one partial camera frame and a lot of very careful footwork that we were not quite finished laying down. The evidence log from this morning contained the results of a forensic sweep on the most recent site, a storage unit facility where we believed a transfer had taken place. We went through it together, the way we always did. I read, Simon annotated, I flagged, Simon cross-referenced. We talked through each item not as a performance of collaboration, but as a genuine process, each of us genuinely necessary. This one, I said, pointing at a photograph of a partial boot print. The tread pattern. We saw something similar at the Kellner facility. Simon leaned across. His arm came near mine, not touching just present, and he tilted his head to study the photograph at a slight angle, which I had long since accepted was simply how he looked at things he was thinking hard about. Different size. He pulled up the Kellner file photograph beside it, but the pattern, yeah, that wear on the outer heel, could be two people with the same boots. Could be one person whose boot size I'd been cataloging wrong from degraded footage. I sat back. Can we get a clearer measurement? I'll call forensics. They might be able to extrapolate from the depth impression. He made a note. His handwriting was catastrophically bad in a way that had stopped surprising me around month 3. I had learned to read it. You holding up? The question was so casual, so smoothly embedded in the ordinary rhythm of our work, that I almost answered before I understood it was a different kind of question from the evidence log. I said I was fine, Simon. You've said it 3 times this morning. He didn't look up from his notepad. That's statistically above your average. My average for fine. Your average for any repeated word in a single morning. Now he looked up, and his expression was, not teasing exactly, but close. The kind of expression that was gentle enough to make teasing feel safe. You usually say it once, Max. You're a concise person. I'm fine, I said, and then caught myself because that was 4 times, which was apparently even more statistically significant. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Okay, stop cataloging my speech patterns. I catalog everything, he said, which was accurate and therefore unanswerable. He went back to his notepad. We should pull the business registration records for anything within a 2-block radius of that storage facility. Secondary contact point. Someone facilitated that transfer. Security desk, maintenance, someone. I'll start on those. The work settled back around us, warm and familiar, and I let it. Work was the thing I was good at. Work did not require me to examine the fact that without the chemical buffer of suppressants, Simon's scent had taken on a warmth and depth that I was spending an increasing amount of effort not noticing. Fine. I was fine. 3 days later, the prescriptions still hadn't arrived. I had made 3 phone calls. I had spoken to the pharmacy twice and the physician's office once. There was apparently a regional supply issue affecting several compounds in the standard omega suppressant formulations, and the delay was expected to be another week, possibly 10 more days, which would put us dangerously close to the edge of the timeline I presented to Captain Harwell with such composed confidence. I did not tell Simon about the extended delay. I told myself this was because there was nothing he could do about it, which was true. I told myself this was because I was managing fine, which was increasingly less true with every day. The thing about omega biology that most suppressant users don't talk about openly is that the unmedicated experience isn't simply the presence of heat. Heat was weeks away still. It's the gradual sharpening of everything leading up to it. Senses, instincts, the particular kind of vulnerability that doesn't feel like weakness from the inside, but rather like the removal of a very useful layer of insulation. I was more aware of temperature, of noise, of scent. My emotional processing, always brisk and efficient by professional habit, was slower, stickier, prone to snagging on things that would ordinarily slide past. Like the way Simon brought me a coffee without asking every morning. Like the way he read my mood from a single glance and adjusted his approach, subtly, precisely, without ever making it feel like adjustment. Like the way his voice sounded when he was thinking through something difficult, lower, slower, with a kind of considered gravity that I found myself listening for even when he was talking to someone else across the precinct floor. I was a professional. I kept working. The business registration search had turned up 3 potential secondary contacts at the storage facility, and we had, after 2 days of careful work, narrowed it down to 1, a maintenance worker named Raymond Gill, who had been employed there for 8 months, who had no prior record, and who had called in sick on exactly the day of the suspected transfer and 3 other days that aligned suspiciously well with our incident timeline. "He's not the architect," Simon said, on the evening of the 3rd day, his elbows on his desk and his hands laced together in front of his chin. The precinct was quieter at this hour. Most day shift had gone, evening shift settling in, the particular change of day atmosphere that was a little looser, a little more human. "He's a conduit." Agreed. I was studying Raymond Gill's employment record. But a conduit can tell us who designed the pipe. "We need to bring him in." Harwell said no field work. Simon's eyes moved to me. "I'd be with you." Harwell said no field work without a partner present. "It's still field work." I kept my voice neutral. "We do it right." "Formal interview request. Pull him in here. He'll be more comfortable on his own ground, but here we control the environment and the record." "You want comfortable. You think he'll talk if he's not scared." "I think he took a maintenance job and somewhere along the way someone offered him something and he made a bad choice. That profile doesn't need scare tactics, it needs a door." Simon looked at me for a moment longer than usual. Not long enough to be uncomfortable. Just long enough that I felt it. "You're good at this," he said. I blinked. "At what?" "Reading people." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he said most things that would have sounded like compliments from anyone else but from Simon, always sounded like observations. "Just noting what's true. You decide what kind of person someone is before I've finished reading the file, and you're right more often than probability allows for." Instinct. Right. But the instinct is built on something. Years of watching people. Something that pays attention. He unfolded his hands. "Raymond Gill will talk to you." Something about his certainty, the simple, solid weight of it, caught in my chest. "Let's draft the interview request," I said, because I was a professional. Raymond Gill came in the next morning. He was younger than his file photograph suggested, early 30s, with the slightly hunched posture of someone who had been anxious for a long time and had stopped noticing. He sat across from me in interview room 2, and Simon stood by the wall, not looming, never looming, just present, while I walked Raymond Gill through the beginning of a conversation that would eventually gently open up to the things we needed to know. I was aware, the whole time, of Simon behind me. Aware in the way I was increasingly aware of most things. Sharpened, sensitized, the unmedicated omega version of awareness that I had spent the last week managing with quiet, exhausting discipline. His stillness was reassuring. His presence was steady. Every question I asked, I could feel his attention at my back, following my thread, ready to pick it up if I needed him to. Raymond Gill talked for an hour and 40 minutes. By the end, we had a name. Not the architect. Raymond didn't have access to that, but a middleman, a real one, with a verifiable face, a business address, and a paper trail that Raymond, with shaking hands, had agreed to help us access. When Raymond left the room with the liaison officer, Simon and I stood in the suddenly empty interview room for a moment before I gathered my notes. The quiet settled around us differently here than at our desks, smaller, more concentrated. "Good interview," he said. "Good backup." I meant it. He looked at me. Then, carefully, he said, "When does the prescription come?" I stilled. I had not told him about the extended delay. "You called the pharmacy." It wasn't quite an accusation, more of a realization. "No." His voice was even. "Your prescription was supposed to arrive this week. It hasn't. You've been managing something for 3 days that was supposed to be resolved by now, and you're tired, Justin." "Not obviously. Most people wouldn't see it. But it's there." I set my notebook down on the interview table. I looked at him. He was looking back, and his expression was not pitying, nothing close to it, because Simon didn't do pity, but careful. The way he was careful with things he valued. "Another week," I said, "maybe 10 days. Something moved across his face and was disciplined back into stillness. "That cuts it close. I know." "Have you told Harwell?" "Not yet." The silence between us was the kind I had learned to read in 2 years of partnership. This one was not comfortable. This one was a decision being made behind his eyes. "You should tell him," Simon said. "Not because you can't manage it, but because he needs to know, and because keeping it from him means keeping it from the people who can help you if something goes wrong. Nothing will go wrong. Justin." Quiet. Just my name and that particular tone he had, low and certain. "I know you believe that. I believe it too, probably, but this isn't about ability. You know that." The interview room felt smaller than usual. The fluorescent light above us had a faint flicker that I hadn't noticed until now. Some electrical irregularity in the hum. I noticed it now. I noticed everything now. Harwell will put me on leave, I said. Maybe. We're close on the Meridian case. If I go on leave, I'll keep it moving. He said it without hesitation, not to dismiss me, to reassure me that the thing I was protecting wouldn't fall apart in my absence. We're close enough that the momentum is in the file now, not just in your head. You documented it well. I know the thread. I looked at him. This man who knew the thread, who had cataloged the evidence, who brought me coffee without asking and read my mood from a glance and had, apparently, noticed that I was tired in a way most people wouldn't see. Why does it matter to you? The question came out before I'd finished deciding whether to ask it. He didn't look surprised. He considered for a moment, which was his way with any question he took seriously. You're my partner, he said, and a brief pause. I care about you. Not as a category, not as an Omega colleague I'm obligated to accommodate. As you, specifically, Justin Silva, who is stubborn in ways that are sometimes extraordinary and sometimes maddening, and who is better at this job than anyone I've worked with and who has been managing something difficult alone when I'm standing right here. The last phrase hung in the air between us, right here. I was aware, with uncomfortable clarity, that my heartbeat had changed, that the particular warmth of the interview room, too small both of us still, his scent and mine, the only scent in it, was doing something to my already sensitized state that I could not fully regulate my way out of. I'll tell Harwell, I said. Simon nodded. Then, doing what he always did, folding the difficult moment back into the ordinary, let's go work that name. Harwell put me on modified duty, which he invented on the spot and which was essentially the same as before, with the addition of a requirement that I was not to be in the building alone, meaning someone had to be with me at all hours of the working day, meaning if I stayed late, someone stayed late, meaning the department's accommodation policy had an asterisk in it now that was shaped exactly like my situation. Simon volunteered. He did it in Harwell's office, with the same calm certainty he applied to everything, and he did it before I could say anything. I don't need a minder, I said when we were back at our desks. I know. He opened his laptop. I'm not minding you. I'm your partner. I'm where I would normally be. Your being where you would normally be for twice as many hours is normal. The Meridian case is at a critical point. Reasonable that I'd be putting in longer hours. Simon. He looked up. Thank you, I said. It cost me less than I expected. Some things, when the insulation is stripped away, are easier to say. Something shifted in his expression. Small, warm, quickly managed. The name Gil gave us. I ran it this morning. And just like that, we were back in the work, which was where we both lived and which was, for now, enough. The name was Marcus Vray. He existed at the precise intersection of legal and not the kind of businessman whose records were meticulous and whose activities, when you traced them far enough, blurred into areas where the line between facilitation and criminality depended on what you could prove and how you phrased your probable cause affidavit. Simon and I spent 4 days mapping him, not just his recent activity, his history, the long view, the accumulated pattern that would eventually give us enough to present to the DA without a single arguable gap. Those 4 days were, I will admit to myself now, if to no one else, some of the best working days of my career, and also some of the most personally difficult. They were good because the work was good, the kind of investigation that is genuinely demanding, that requires your whole self, that gives back in proportion to what you put in. They were difficult because the unmedicated edge of my senses refused to be disciplined into irrelevance, and what those senses were most consistently, insistently trained on was the man sitting 4 feet from me for 10 hours a day. I learned things about Simon in those 4 days that I had not registered before. Not clearly, not with this precision. I learned that when he was thinking hard about something abstract, he tapped the end of his pen against his thumbnail twice, irregularly, in no particular pattern. I learned that he always reread his notes before he closed a file, even if the file had been sitting untouched all day, as though he didn't trust himself to remember unless he confirmed it. I learned that he had a very faint habit, when he was near me specifically, of orienting slightly toward me, not conspicuously, not leaning in, just angled, the way a person angles toward a source of warmth without being conscious of doing it. I was not supposed to notice these things. I had been not noticing them for 2 years, which had apparently required more pharmaceutical assistance than I had given it credit for. On the fourth day, late in the evening, we had the framework of the case nearly complete. The middle thread was Marcus Ray. The higher thread, whoever was directing him, was still out of reach. But Gill's testimony and the evidence we'd mapped put us close enough that the DA's office had confirmed they were interested. The precinct was quiet. The cleaners had come and gone, evening shift was out. We were, as per Harwell's modified accommodation clause, still both present. I had been reading the same evidence report for long enough that the words had started to detach from meaning. My eyes were tired. The edges of the day had accumulated in my shoulders and at the base of my skull. Unmedicated, the fatigue felt different than usual. Not just tired, but thin, like something that normally kept the world at a manageable distance had worn down. You should eat something. Simon set something on the edge of my desk, a sandwich in a paper bag from the deli on the corner. I hadn't noticed him leaving. I stared at it. "You've been here for 11 hours and I haven't seen you eat since morning." He sat back down. He had one for himself. Ordinary, matter of fact. "Just noting what's true. Your concentration dips in the last hour before hunger becomes a problem. I can tell." "You can tell," I said. "You start reading the same page twice. You just read that evidence report for the fourth time." I looked at him. He was unwrapping his own sandwich with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who had decided to rest for a few minutes and was doing exactly that. No more and no less. "How long have you been tracking that?" I asked. "The page reading? About 6 weeks." He glanced up. "Is that?" A small hesitation. Rare for him. "Is that strange?" I considered the question honestly. In the cold light of logic, an observer might call it strange. A man who cataloged the page-reading habits of his partner, the particular tells of concentration flagging, the point at which hunger began to register as performance dip. In the warm, worn light of 11 hours' work, in an empty precinct with the accumulated weight of 2 years of partnership between us, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "No," I said. "It's not strange." He looked at me for a moment. Then he went back to his sandwich. I opened the paper bag. Inside, the turkey on rye I always ordered when we got deli food, without him asking, with the pickles on the side because I didn't like them on the sandwich but would eat them separately, which he had observed once, 3 months ago, and apparently filed away. I ate, and the evening settled around us, and I thought about what it meant to be known. Not in the way the world knew you, the designation, the file, the record, but in the way of small accumulated observations that added up to something real. "Simon," I said. He was eating. "I want to ask you something." I set my sandwich down. He looked up, and I want you to answer honestly. "When don't I?" That was fair. "Why did you volunteer to stay?" The modified duty. "You could have let someone else do it. There are other officers Harwell would have assigned." He chewed, swallowed, set his own food down with the deliberation of someone who is not going to answer this quickly. "I told you already," he said. "You're my partner. I care about you. You told me you cared about me specifically. As me, not as a category." I held his gaze. The sharpness of the last several days, the unmedicated edge that caught everything, was catching this. The slight change in his breathing, the steadiness of his eyes that was doing what steadiness sometimes does, working to hold something still. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? The silence that followed was a full, weighted, adult silence. Not the silence of something avoided. The silence of something being decided. "I think you know what it means," he said quietly. My heart was doing something inconvenient. "I think I want to hear you say it." Simon looked at me. His expression, that broad, expressive face that photographs badly, was completely unguarded in a way I had seen only twice before, in the 2 genuinely dangerous situations that had reached their most dangerous points, when the guard came down all the way, when there was nothing left to manage. "I've been trying," he said slowly, "for a long time to be the right kind of partner to you. Professional, reliable, someone you could trust without it being complicated." A pause. "You don't invite complication, you don't make room for it. So I didn't make room for it either." But I am not," he stopped, tried again. "I am not indifferent to you, Justin. I have not been indifferent to you for a very long time. The way I'm not indifferent is not professional. Is not partnership appropriate, technically speaking? His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. And I have been managing that, very carefully, for approximately 2 years. Which is why I know where you are in a room at all times. Which is why I know what hunger looks like on your face. Which is why I volunteered for this. Because the idea of someone else being here with you, not you being alone. I understand you don't need protection, but someone else being the one who was present. I didn't want that. I wanted it to be me. The precinct hummed around us. That particular frequency only the sleep-deprived can hear. I was not going to cry. I was a professional and also simply not a crier. But something in my chest was doing something significant, and the unmedicated edge of my senses, which had been a source of difficulty for 2 weeks, was in this moment making everything perfectly, inescapably clear. I said carefully, been increasing my suppressant dosage twice a year for the last 2 years. Simon blinked. A flicker of something across his face. Processing. The first time, I continued, was about a week after you became my partner. The physician thought I was experiencing stress-related hormonal fluctuation. I paused. I did not correct that assumption. He was very still. I am a concise person, I said. I am not going to make a large production of this. I held his gaze. But I think we have been managing the same thing in opposite directions for the same amount of time. And I think we are both, at this point, very tired of managing it. Simon Roach. Methodical, systematic, cataloging Simon Roach who mapped every angle before he moved. Moved without any of his usual deliberation. He reached across the space between our desks and he covered my hand with his. That was all. His hand over mine, warm and certain the way he was about most things. His thumb traced a single slow arc across my knuckle. Neither of us spoke for a moment. We didn't need to. Your prescription, he said eventually, is still a week away. Then I'll be here. His hand didn't move, not because Harwell said to, not because of modified duty or accommodation clauses. Because I want to be. Is that allowed? Something in me, some knotted, carefully managed thing that had been held in place for 2 years and more sharply for 2 weeks, released with so little drama it almost surprised me. Yes, I said. That's allowed. We brought in Marcus Vray 6 days later. The DA's office had signed off. The evidence package was complete. Harwell had given us the green light for a controlled arrest which technically constituted fieldwork. And Harwell had technically cleared me for it. Given that my prescription had arrived 3 days earlier than the latest estimate, which I chose to take as the universe acknowledging that I had in fact held things together adequately. I was medicated. I was clear-headed. I was also, for the first time in 6 years, going into a field operation with something that felt different from the usual steady hum of professional focus. Simon was next to me in the car. He drove. I navigated. This had been our arrangement since the beginning. Not a conversation, just an organic settling into what worked. I had better route instinct, he had better spatial awareness behind the wheel. The radio traffic murmured between stations as we moved through the early morning streets. You nervous? He asked. No. Then, are you? A little. He said it without any particular concern about saying it. Simon, I had come to understand, was not someone who considered the admission of nervousness to be a weakness. It was just information. Very smart. He'll have thought about this scenario. Smart people make smart mistakes. I watched the city move past the window. They outsmart themselves. They plan for the version of you they've invented in their head, not the version that shows up. And we're going to be different from the version he's invented. We're always different from what people expect. I glanced across. You, because you're calmer than they're ready for. Me, because you're an Omega police officer who they've already underestimated before you open your mouth. I smiled, just slightly. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of that. The corner of his mouth turned. The dawn was doing something beautiful with the streets. That particular early morning quality when the light is still deciding what color to be. Simon's profile against it was something I would let myself look at now. A small, significant permission. The arrest of Marcus Vray went almost exactly as we'd planned, which was unusual enough that we both acknowledged it afterward with the particular satisfaction of things done right. It was collected from his business address. He opened the door himself in a suit as though he'd been expecting a meeting, and when the warrant was presented, he did what's smart. calculating people sometimes do when the game is comprehensively over, he went very still, said nothing, and cooperated precisely enough to preserve his options. His lawyer was there within 40 minutes. That was his right. We had the evidence. What Vray gave us in the negotiation that followed over the next 24 hours, handled by the DA's team, not us, our part was done, was the name at the top. The architect. The person who had been directing the equipment acquisition toward a purpose that, once fully understood, had made Simon go very quiet in Harwell's office while the briefing was read out, which was the response of someone processing something they were glad had been stopped in time. The Meridian case closed in a way that cases rarely close cleanly, completely, with the kind of documentation that made future prosecution significantly easier. Harwell shook both our hands. It was an uncharacteristic gesture from him, which told you something about how he felt. Afterward, standing in the corridor outside his office, Simon and I looked at each other in the way of two people who have finished something significant and are still holding the shape of it. "Good work," he said. "Ours," I said, because it was. Fully, equally ours. He smiled then, not the restrained corner of the mouth shift, but a real smile, broad and unself-conscious, the kind I had seen only a few times before and had, without letting myself examine why, noticed and held on to each time. "Ours," he agreed. The prescription, once it arrived, stabilized within 48 hours as expected. The sharpened edges of the unmedicated 2 weeks rounded back to the ordinary. My senses returned to their professional, managed calibration. The world went back to the distances it usually kept. Some things did not go back because they had not been pharmaceutical in the first place. Simon and I had not had a conversation, subsequent to the one in the empty precinct, that could be called explicitly defining. We were not people who defined things explicitly. We were people who observed, cataloged, moved in the same direction, and let the accumulated weight of evidence speak for itself. What had changed was the hand. Not literally. We were professional. We were at work. We were careful. But in the private topography of how we occupied the same space, something had shifted. The careful calibrated distance we had both been maintaining gave way, not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally, in the way of things that had been held at arm's length for a long time, finally being allowed to simply exist where they want to exist. He still brought me coffee. Now occasionally I brought him tea, which he drank and which he shouldn't have because caffeine after noon made him restless, but which I brought anyway because I had learned he liked it, and because liking someone I was discovering involves making room for their small contradictions. He still cataloged things. Now sometimes I told him things directly instead of making him observe them. A small act of trust, repeated daily. Not big revelations. Just, "I'm finding this case frustrating. This interview tired me more than I expected. The thing Harwell said in this morning's briefing is going to be a problem, and I'd like to think through it with you before we get to it. You'd like to think through it with me. Not would you like to." He would. Always. He had always been willing. But would I like to? Would I let him in? I was letting him in. It was slower than I might have predicted. It was also steadier. A month after the Meridian case closed, we were assigned a new case, something smaller, more contained. A fraud investigation that would involve a lot of the kind of patient, methodical record tracing that Simon was quietly excellent at, and that I found tedious enough that I required regular breaks and something to argue about. On the third day of that investigation, in the early afternoon, Simon brought back lunch from the streetcar 2 blocks from the precinct. He set it on my desk without comment, unwrapped his own, and ate while reading through a bank statement that appeared to be putting him to sleep. "You're losing focus," I said. "I'm maintaining focus through an act of sheer will. There's a difference." He turned a page. The account flagged in the morning briefing. "I keep finding the same 3 transactions and then the trail goes cold. You'd see something different." I turned my chair and looked at his screen. He shifted slightly to give me a better angle, the small accommodation so natural by now that neither of us noticed it. I looked at the transactions. I looked at the account number. Something at the back of my mind made a quiet, familiar shift. "The dates," I said, "not the amounts. What happens if you map the dates against the company's internal calendar?" He was already pulling up the calendar file. "There," I said when it populated. "Every transaction precedes a board meeting by exactly 4 days." Simon went still with the particular stillness of a thread being pulled. Then he laughed. A short, genuine, surprised sound. 4 days. Enough time for a paper trail to look organic. Not so much time that the benefit isn't immediately useful. He was already taking notes, the catastrophically bad handwriting moving fast. You do this in your sleep. I do it while eating. Slightly different. I went back to my own lunch. Mapped the board meeting timeline back 12 months. I think you'll find the pattern is longer than we thought. He was mapping before I'd finished the sentence. I sat in the ordinary afternoon of it. The hum of the precinct, the particular quality of work shared with someone who worked like an extension of you. The coffee going cold because I'd forgotten it, and I felt something I could only call without irony or qualification content. I was a police officer. I was uninterested in leave. I was 6 years into a career I had built against the grain of every well-meaning advisory session, every careful neutral face, every implication that my designation precluded my ambition. I was also, for the first time in some years, not managing the fact of Simon Roach with pharmaceutical precision and professional compartmentalization. Both of these things were true. They were not in conflict. They were simply the full account of who I was, rather than the carefully curated version I had been presenting to myself. 3 weeks after that, on a weekend, we were not at the precinct. We were at Simon's apartment, which I had been to twice before in 2 years, case-related both times, retrieving files or waiting out a weather situation, and which I was now at for no reason that had anything to do with work. Simon had cooked, which he did with the same systematic attention he brought to evidence files. The result was something involving slow-cooked chicken and herbs I couldn't name that was genuinely good. We sat across from each other at his table in the early evening light. The case files were not present. The radio was on at low volume. Outside his window, the city was doing its evening things, the particular urban sound palette that becomes white noise once you've lived near it long enough. We talked, not about work, which was startling enough that I noticed it. Two people who worked together for 10 hours a day, finding that the conversation, unmoored from the professional, did not dry up. He told me things I hadn't known, that he had not always been calm, that his particular stillness was a learned thing rather than a born one, something he had constructed carefully over years in response to an upbringing that had been the opposite of calm. I told him things I rarely said, that the determination to be a police officer despite everything had not always felt like confidence, that in the early years it had felt like sheer terrified momentum, the commitment to keep moving fast enough that doubt couldn't catch up. He listened to that with the focused quality of his listening, which was total, not waiting for his turn to speak, not formulating his response, present entirely with what I was saying. "You don't doubt it now," he said when I'd finished. "No, not this part of it." I considered. "I'm still stubborn about being there, about not taking leave, but it comes from a different place than it used to. It's not momentum against fear anymore. What is it? Knowing," I said. "Knowing that this is mine. Knowing that I built it and it's real and I'm good at it." I met his eyes. "That took a while. Most things that are real take a while," he said, in a tone that was about more than just the career. I looked at him across the table. The evening light was doing something good for the room. Warm, particular, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. Simon in that light looked like what he was. Someone who had been quietly significant to me for longer than I'd been prepared to acknowledge, and who had apparently been managing the same knowledge about me with the same painstaking, professional care. "We were both being very responsible," I said. "Very." His expression was wry and warm and not entirely without regret for the time. "Very responsible. Professionally prudent. Extraordinarily so." I pushed back my chair and stood, and I walked around the table, which was not a long walk, but which was a deliberate one, and I stopped beside him, and he turned to face me, his hands resting on his knees, looking up at me with no surprise and no managed stillness, just open. Open in the way of someone who has stopped managing and decided to simply receive whatever comes. "I would like," I said in the most precise, considered, concise way I could manage, "for us to be something that is not only professional." He reached up and took my hand. The same gesture as the precinct, his hand over mine, the slow arc of his thumb. Grounding, certain, warm. "I would like that too," he said. "I've wanted that for a long time." I sat down beside him rather than across from him, which reorganized the geometry of the evening entirely, and the conversation continued but differently, with the accumulated 2 years of careful management finally allowed to simply rest, and the thing underneath it, which had always been real, allowed to exist in the open air. The internal review following the Meridian case resulted in 3 commendations, 2 promotions in adjacent units that had worked the perimeter of the case, and a recommendation from Harwell that the cold case connections Simon had mapped be passed to a specialist unit for follow-up. The paperwork took longer than the case. Our new case, the fraud investigation, closed satisfactorily, with arrests and evidence packages and the particular satisfaction of a file that ended cleanly. Then there was another case. And another. This is how it goes in this work. The city does not pause between narratives. You finish one thing and begin the next, and the accumulation of finished things is the career. My suppressant prescription was updated. The physician noted that the dosage I had been maintaining for 2 years was, given my current stability indicators, perhaps higher than strictly necessary. We adjusted it. I did not explain to her the full rationale for the original escalation. I simply said circumstances had changed, which was accurate in every relevant sense. Simon and I were still partners. Harwell was aware, in the way that supervising officers are aware of things they have elected to address through department policy rather than direct conversation, that something had shifted in our partnership dynamic. Department policy required disclosure, which we had provided in the appropriate formal channel. Harwell had signed the form. He had said, and this was his exact phrasing, "Don't make it my problem and it won't be a problem." We had agreed this was entirely manageable. It was manageable because the work did not change. The work was still what it had always been, methodical and instinctive in complementary proportion. Evidence and pattern recognition, his angles and my momentum, the coverage and the movement. We were still the best clear rate in the division. The case files did not know or care about the rest of it. What changed was only the private things. The small, accumulating dailiness of being known by someone who had decided you were worth knowing in full, and being known in the quiet, unglamorous, particular way of people who sit across from each other for 10 hours a day and learn the private language of how the other person thinks and fails and recovers and tries again. I had been told at various points in my life that my designation would complicate things, that being what I was, Omega, officer, obstinate, would require more management than most people wanted to take on, that the complexity of me was a problem someone else would have to solve if they wanted to be close to me. Simon did not experience me as a problem. He experienced me, as best I could read it, as something genuinely interesting, something worth cataloging carefully over a long time, because the data was worth keeping. I experienced him the same way. 2 years of accumulated observation that had always told the truth that I had simply chosen not to read directly. There was a morning sometime in the month after the dinner after the change, where I came into the precinct at my usual time and found him already at his desk and his coffee already on the monitor and a second cup at the edge of his desk at my angle already there. Not set out when he heard me coming, already there. He brought it when he came in, before I arrived, knowing I would arrive, preparing it in advance the way you prepare for something you are certain of. I sat down. I took the coffee. He didn't look up from whatever he was reading, because it was not a moment that required acknowledgement. It was just the ordinary, already. This is what it is to be known, I thought, not the dramatic version, not the recognition scene or the spoken declaration, though those mattered too and we'd had them in our careful, concise way. But this, the cup already there, the preparation that presumes your presence, the small, daily, unglamorous choice to include someone in your ordinary. I had spent 6 years building something that was mine, the career, the record, the right to be exactly where I had insisted on being despite everyone's careful neutral faces. That was mine. It remained mine. What was new and what I found I had made room for after all. The room that Simon had said I didn't make, and that I had decided to prove in the quiet, unglamorous way that I was capable of making, was this. Us. The accumulated dailiness of 2 people who knew each other the full way and had elected to keep knowing. I drank my coffee. I opened my case files. Simon was reading something that was making him tap the end of his pen against his thumbnail, twice irregularly. The precinct hummed around us. The morning held its breath. I did not take my leave. He did not leave my side. And in that, everything was exactly as it should be. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story. And if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.